This is how to beat up weak players and take their chips, Module 1. How to love weak players, target and profile them. Really excited to be bringing this month's training to you, mainly because I know what a big effect it can have on your game, your poker bank balance and your enjoyment from poker. This is, well, it might be the least technically sophisticated month's training that we do on Breakthrough Poker Coaching together. There are certainly more technically sophisticated concepts. There are almost certainly perhaps more, I don't know, poker geeky type concepts that people would like to talk about over a glass of beer or whatever. But this is the one. This is the month that can make you the most money. This is the skill that if you can master it, it will bring you more success at poker than anything else. Which is an interesting contradiction because it's not technically difficult to master, but it takes some time and some thought and some continual application in your game. If you don't believe me, by the way, please feel free to corner Doyle Brunson, Tom Dwan, Phil Ivey, any of the people that have made serious money playing poker and ask them where their money came from. The vast majority of it comes from bad players. From bad players. So that's what we're going to look at this month. We're going to look at how to crack the code of maximizing winnings from weak players. And I promise you, whatever level you're playing at, if you can get this right and master it, it'll make a huge, huge jump forward in your overall results. So first of all, let's look at getting our mindset right. So the key to winning at poker is to exploit bad players. So I want you to think, for example, about how you fare against those players and ask yourself, have you ever been frustrated when playing against them? I'd suggest that you're not human if you haven't been. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to make a commitment to yourself right now, a commitment to ending that frustration today, to really looking at what's causing that frustration and tackling it by putting something better in its place. Now, I would of course recommend that you go back to the Winning Poker Blueprint, my course on sorting out your mindset, if this is a particular problem for you and if this is a particular problem after this module. But I think that this training will really help you because it will give you something different to focus on. And that's a new mindset, which, whether this is a big or small problem for you, you should adopt right now. And that is that you're going to eat up weak players. Not literally, that would be horrific, but that you're going to really, really dominate them and make it your mission, if you like, to exploit them, to make maximum chips from them, and to go out of your way to make their life miserable by beating them. That's a pretty effective way to end your frustration with getting unlucky or running bad against bad players. So the big secret, which I talked about at the top of this module, which the pros really don't want you to know for very kind of obvious reasons, because you might actually start doing it. And I've gone for huge there in capitals. It's not just big, apparently, it's huge. So brace yourselves. And the big secret I don't want you to know is where the gold is at. And that is that you don't make money from outplaying good players. You don't make money from making really great super thin value bets or hero calls, or even from being incredibly good at poker. That doesn't make you money. The reason to become good at poker is that actually there's more people that play worse than you, because that's where you make money. You make money from playing people who aren't as good at poker as you. It's as simple as that. The cards will break even over time. We know this. Doesn't seem like it sometimes, but I promise you it's true. They literally don't know who you are and they don't care. But you will make your money from people making worse decisions than you with the same cards, if that makes sense. To be very specific, and the thing I'm going to focus on most of all this month, you make it from having a better hand from someone that doesn't know any better and betting the crap out of it. So you have the best hand, someone else has the second best hand, and you get as many chips from them in that situation as possible. Now there is a plan B. You can also make it from weak players folding when they shouldn't. And I've called it plan B because that's not where you're going to make as many chips. Where you can actually, stack people, take all of their money in one go, is by value betting them when they have a worse hand. So that's what we're going to focus on in a really quite maniacal way. First of all, let's address the mindset side of it in a little bit more depth, because I know how frustrating it can be when bad players outdraw you, or somebody makes, a call they shouldn't make and they get lucky. Even the pros get frustrated with this after a certain amount of time, although it takes them much longer than it takes, a casual player. But let's look at this and let's ask a different question. Rather than saying, why did he call, or why do bad players always beat me, or why do I run bad? Let's ask a different question. Who cares if weak players run good? The truth is, it doesn't matter how good you get at poker generally, or even at exploiting weak players. Bad players will always get lucky and beat you. They always will. You know as well as I do that when you put your money in poker, let's say you have 2 aces and they have 9-7 suited or whatever, they still have, 18% or whatever it is. They're always going to have a chance. There's almost no situations in poker where you have 0% chance to win. So a bad player will always have a chance, which means that they will always get lucky on occasion. And there's something more fundamental. If that didn't happen, if they didn't get lucky on occasion, they wouldn't play. There would literally be no poker for money. It would be like chess, where, you very quickly find out if someone's better than you and they beat you, and who wants to play them again, because it sucks. Unless you steal their queen when they're not looking or something, you're not going to have a lot of fun. So poker only exists because of that lucky element. Here's the flip side of this. Bad players will always get lucky to beat you, but you're not going to care, because you're going to punish them so hard for their mistakes that you're going to make enough money from them that when they do run good against you, it doesn't affect your profitability, and you kind of will get this ingrained in you. And this equation will make you so much money, the equation where you get it in good against them, you punish them really hard, they give you their chips versus the few times they get unlucky. It can be so far in your favour that you're going to be, making it this thing, your mission, to find these weak players and beat them up. So the brutal truth is, if you're listening to this and you feel like bad players are getting lucky on you regularly, it just means that you're not making enough from them at other times. So what we're going to do is steal from the best players in the game. We're going to learn to love them, and we're going to hunt them out. It's going to become our mission to exploit weak players, and I'm going to give you a simple system to do that. It's a 5-step system to killing the weak, which is a beautiful sentiment. I think you can agree. Let's find the weak and really brutalise them. I'm not a nice person, but I will make you more chips, I swear. So the first step is what we've been talking about, and it's making it your mission. I can pretty much guarantee, whether you're listening to this as someone who's struggling with their game or whether you're printing money at poker, I can pretty much guarantee you're not spending enough time thinking about finding weak players and making money from them. So whatever you're doing in your game right now, spend more time doing this, because it's a simple truth that if you're playing with someone that's worse than you at poker, you are making money. Everything else being equal, right? Providing you're not tilting or drunk or something stupid like that. Everything else being equal, if they're worse than you, you're making money. So it should be your mission every time you play to win at poker to find weak players and use this system. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is to find them. And we're going to look at game selection, but we're also going to look at something I call player selection in a second. So we'll get onto that. You've got to make sure you're playing in the games with the worst players. Next, you're going to profile them. And this is not just discovering that they're weak. This is actually developing a proper read on them and using your experience and some of the knowledge I'll give you now to basically isolate exactly what their weaknesses are, so that you know what you want to do against them and you maximize your winnings against them. So you're going to profile them. Step number 4 is you're going to isolate them. So as often as possible, you're going to be in pots when it's you and the weak player. And that's simply because when we, brutalize the weak and take their chips, we don't want to share them, right? Makes sense. So we're going to look at isolating. And then we're going to look at value betting them to oblivion. This is our normal 5th step. Plus, there's the not-so-secret hidden plan B of sometimes making them fold when they shouldn't, which we're also going to look at in this training, but that's not our primary focus. Our primary focus is going to be value betting weak players, but we're also going to look a little bit at using aggression weak players. That's going to be module number 3. Okay, so there's your 5-step system to killing the weak. Make it your mission, find them, profile them, isolate them, value bet them into oblivion. Pretty straightforward. So we've talked about making it your mission. We've talked about how important it is and how many poker fortunes are based on making it their mission. I'll give you one example. Most of Doyle Brunson's wealth, most of his wealth, well, most might be a bad word, but because I have no idea what Doyle's bank balances are. Let me put it another way. A huge proportion of the money Doyle's made in one go in poker came from a guy called Jimmy Chagra, who was a mafia guy who loved to play poker, had got a lot of ill-gotten gains, and knew he was probably going to prison for life. And he just dumped millions in a cash game in Vegas with Doyle and Chip recently. And I think I'm right in saying that bought Doyle his country estate. I could be wrong in that. But he definitely made a ton of money from it. Tom Dwan's exactly the same. You know, Tom Dwan is a fantastic poker player. But the person Tom Dwan's won most money from is Guy Liberté, the Cirque du Soleil bloke. That's the individual he's won the most cash from, who is a player that you could probably beat, or certainly, maybe not anymore, but he certainly was when he started playing poker. So these top players make this their mission, and you should too. So let's look at how you do it. How do you find weak players? And we're going to call this player selection. So game selection is everything in poker. I'm sure you've heard that before. It's the old story. If you're the 6th worst player in the world, but the other 5 players in your game are the 5 worst, then you're making money. So actually, it's not so much game selection as player selection. I'm officially trademarking that. Don't even dream about putting it on t-shirts. I'm already doing it. This thing is going to blow up, and it's all mine, all right? Player selection. So, if you want to win, you must be playing with players worse than you. We know this to be true. I've banged on about it a lot already in this module. The way that we're going to get that is by investing time and extreme discipline in this idea. So this is not just going to be something that you know to be true. It's something you're actually going to spend your time doing, because this is the quickest way to win money at poker. So if you're playing cash, you should be spending actual time game selecting and finding the regular weak players in your game. That's actually kind of 2 separate points. The first point is that when you want to go and play cash, you're going to be wanting to find tables that are the most profitable, either at your live casino, by assessing the lineups. Getting the floor person to help is a good tip if you don't know everyone. In the online lobby, you're going to look at things like percentage of flops seen and find the highest number and stuff like that. And then the second thing is getting to know the regular weak players in the games that you regularly play in, because the same people come back and lose over and over again. You need to know who they are. In tournaments, it's a little bit harder to player select, of course, because we don't get to pick where we sit. In sit and goes, I guess you can have some control over it. In multi-table tournaments, very difficult. But the type of tournaments you're buying into should guarantee there are enough weak players. And you will find, of course, that your local card room or your online room, the same players will play in the same kind of level. So you will get to know some of the players. But basically, your buy-in should guarantee the level of players you're coming up against. And you should have, you know, that big edge on them. So the real idea between player selection, now trademarked in this slide, you see, halfway through writing this, I thought, wow, someone is going to rip this off. Go away and license it, make a movie out of it. I'm going to be sad. Don't want that. So it's now got the TM. The old quote is, if you can't spot the sucker at the table, it's you. So when you're sitting at the table is when you really want to kick your player selection into high gear. And that is that you should know the players you want to play pots with. And if they're on the table, you shouldn't be there either. Now, in a tournament, as we've said, that's tough to do. Although there are many multi-table tournaments where there's not going to be anyone you want to play a pot with, being frank with you. But this idea is one that perhaps people know, perhaps they don't. But they certainly don't put enough time and effort in compared to the really successful top players in the game. And that is that, quite simply, you should be playing pots more with weak players than you should with strong players. And I'll say that again by reading out what's on the slide. You need to select the players you play pots with and increase the amount of hands you play against weaker players. Now, I want you to ask yourself really honestly if you're doing this right now when you play. Or are you just looking at your cards and going, you know, King Jack, all right, I'll play King Jack this time, or whatever it is. Because really, you're not exploiting having weak players in your game unless you're going out your way to play hands against them. And why play as many hands against strong players as weak players? Doesn't make any sense, right? It's not how you win at poker. Now understand that there are some situations where, a decent amount of situations where this is not going to affect your decision. If you wake up with 2 kings, you're not going to give a monkeys who's in the pot. What I'm talking about is your general approach to the game, and you're looking for opportunities where you can make extra chips, okay? So expand the range of hands you play against weak players, especially with position. We're going to look at isolating in a bit in this month's training. But the more you can have position over anyone in poker, the better it is. Certainly against weak players, it's going to be better because you're going to win so many pots when you've seen how they act, because they act so predictably, which is something we'll talk about more in a sec. But you want to expand the range of hands you play simply so you're playing more pots against them. Okay? And then the way to do this is just to make sure that you're thinking about each pre-flop decision situationally. And I've written where of the week because you should be aware of the spots at the table and how your position relates to them in each hand. So one technique I referred to a couple of times is that if you're playing at a relatively tight table and you've got a very weak player in the big blind, well, you should be prepared to massively expand your opening raise because of the chances that you'll get to play a hand in position with that weak player in the big blind who will defend too much. So whereas you might fold, I don't know, this is off the top of my head, but let's say you might fold King Jack under the gun in a lot of games. If you had a really tight game and you had someone in the big blind who's going to defend too much, well, then it might become an automatic open. So it's really important to think about each pre-flop decision situationally based on where the weak players are at the table, whether or not they've entered the pot or not. Okay, let's move on from finding weak players and talk about profiling them. So this is incredibly important, and this is the skill that you should really work hard at, because it's one thing to know that someone's a bad poker player, but very, very often what people do is they just go, oh, he's a fish or he's a weak player, and they write that in their notes, and then that's it. And they don't ask the next couple of key questions, which are, what are my opponent's weaknesses and how can I exploit them? So I ask these questions endlessly, not just when talking about weak players, and I think they're just fundamental to winning at poker. What are my opponent's weaknesses and how can I exploit them? The sooner that you can answer those 2 questions, the sooner that you can make chips off that bloke that you wouldn't otherwise make. The tip that I give you is to make assumptions and then work from them. So, like, developing a profile on somebody is almost like a funnel where you start off with some big generalizations and then you get specific information that gets you to, you know, a really kind of detailed answer. So it's exactly the same as, you know, when the police make a profile of their subject and, you know, they narrow down possibilities until they have something close to the answer. So if somebody buys into the game and you think that they might be a weak player or a fish, and you see them limp into a couple of pots, you can immediately start to make some assumptions. You can assume that they're not aggressive enough. You can assume the type of hand that they might be limping. So a lot of times people limp, you know, hands they want to see a flop with, but they don't think are strong enough to raise. So make assumptions and then work from them. So use those assumptions until you see evidence that they aren't true. That's how you start making a read. And then you're constantly developing that read from a general he's weak, I can win against him, down to specific tendencies and things that he does that he knows are wrong that you can exploit. So that's kind of the start of the read process. Now, as I've said, the quicker you can do it, the sooner you can make chips. So let's look at how to make quick reads on players, because the sooner we know that they're exploitable, the quicker that we can do it. I've split this up into online and live. The things that are online, most of them, a lot of them will apply to live, so I'll go over them again. But here's a list. You can probably add to it. So this is how you make a quick read about someone. So first of all, the number of tables they play can often be a giveaway online. If someone's playing 8 tables at a specific limit and they buy into all tables quickly, then they're probably, you know, a regular of some kind. If they're playing 2 tables and one's a tournament and one's a cash game, well, they're much more likely to be a casual or weak player. Irregular stack size is a big tip-off in cash games. If somebody is buying in for less than the full buy-in, then they're probably a casual player and that's all they have in their bankroll. That's generally true. Limping pots is huge. Sadly, people don't limp pots like they used to, but still they do occasionally, and very, very often a weaker player is going to be limping pots. It's just taking a moment of sadness that people don't do that anymore. But they still do sometimes. Cold calling raises is still a huge tell that somebody's a weaker player. So by cold calling, I mean somebody's raised and someone else enters the pot for the first time and calls a raise. Good players just don't do that very often, unless there are certain conditions that are being met. Very, very often, a good player will either enter the pot by being the raiser or the three better. So one thing you can look for if you're playing multiple tables is obviously the gap between the VPIP and the PFR. So the gap between voluntary money put in the pot and the pre-flop raise. With a good player, that gap will be small. With a bad player, that gap may well be big because they are cold calling raises or limping into pots. Bet sizing mistakes is something you can pick up on very often as a weak player. So over time, the amount in a pre-flop raise has got lower and lower. So back in the day, it would be 3 times the big blind as a minimum, sometimes bigger. Now 3 times the big blind is the maximum for a lot of good players, and very often it's less. So if you see someone sit down and make a 4x raise for their first play, then they're probably a weak player. It's good reverse psychology, actually. If you want people to think you're weak, you can just do that in your first hand. That's a tip. Missing value bets is a dead giveaway. Now, this is not super quick because you need to see somebody actually hold a hand. But if you see somebody turn over a hand and think, you know, they check down the turn and river or just the river or something, that's a very, very good indication that they're too passive. With a made hand, I meant to say, with a hand they should have value bet. That's a very, very good indication that they're passive. And then finally, the chat box is always going to be like one of your number one ways of developing a read on someone. People do talk in the chat box sometimes, and you should encourage them to do that, and maybe even strike up conversation with them, because it will tell you a lot about how they think about poker. So if somebody takes a bad beat, you should definitely sympathize with them and ask them about it, stuff like that, just to find out how they think about the game, because if they're a weaker player, they will give themselves away very, very often. Okay, and then live, obviously we've got a lot more information to go at because we can see the person. So some other things which might give you a very quick read. How they look. Now this is a slightly tricky one, because you get a lot of people in poker nowadays who want to look the part. So they'll kind of dress appropriately, which in poker means scruffy. And they'll have sunglasses and headphones and stuff. So it can sometimes be tricky, but other times you can tell a fish out of water, someone that doesn't play a lot of poker, someone that's a weekend warrior or whatever. What they say is incredibly important. Please pay attention when you're at the table to get a quick read on somebody. What they say to the dealer, what they say when they sit down, stuff like that can really expose a player as a weak player. And then what they tell you, which is also what they say, but it's slightly different, because I really want you to encourage you to talk to players when you first meet them. Whether you sit down at a table or whether they sit down at your table, say hello to them and talk to them. I habitually will talk to the people that I sit down next to when I meet a new table, because people will tell you stuff. They'll tell you stuff about how they play, they'll give you information, and then they'll not only tell you stuff about their own game, but they'll also tell you stuff about other people's game around the table. I'm sure you've experienced this, where little alliances form just because you're sitting next to somebody, which is kind of illogical because you still want their chips, but it does happen. So do listen to how they talk about the game. How comfortable they are in a live environment will obviously tell you a lot, although you've got to be wary that sometimes experienced online players haven't played live that much. And then a subset of that is chip handling. People that haven't spent a lot of time handling casino chips will be uncomfortable with them. And just like the etiquette of how the game works, I could have included there. How experienced somebody is will influence that and will give you tips as to that. All these things can help you get a quick read really quickly. And then I've put playing errors as online, because when you're playing live, you should still be looking for things like cold calling raises and limping pots and all of that kind of good stuff that can tip someone off as being a weak player. So we want to categorize them as quickly as possible, and then we want to funnel our read, or develop our read if you like. So a developed read is something that good players get to and bad players never really take the time to get to. And this is the one thing that I preach to players when they're trying to improve, because there's no reason why you can't have fantastic reads on a player, even if you're not particularly good at poker. Because really it's just using information that's out there. Now, as you get more experienced, it's going to be easier for you to do. You're going to do it quicker. But all you're using is information that you can see, and it's just a case of paying attention and recording the right things. So just to give you a few guidelines about what you should have in your notes. Now, if you play live, you should still take notes, by the way. You can either remember them and then make the notes away from the table, or you can make them on your phone, or you can take a pad. In the old days, like live grinders used to take, pads to games. Now you can do it on your phone, and you just do it in a break or step away from the table, whatever. But you should still be making notes on players. Online, it's super easy, and there's no excuse not to do it. So some of the things you should be recording are noteworthy plays they've made. Hopefully that's obvious. If somebody makes a play that really stands out as being either something you weren't expecting, something you know to be wrong, a weird bet or an impressive bluff or whatever it is, you should be recording them. Repeated tendencies is the big one. So it's things that they do over and over again. So a huge one is if you discover that somebody is always trappy when they flop a big hand, or if they, like to trap with their big hands pre-flop, or if they overbet when they have a hand that they're, really confident with, or whatever. You should also be recording their view of you. This is really important. Very few people actually record this in their reads, but how a player views you is essential to knowing what decisions he makes. And that's going to be built up with the history between you. So any kind of pots that you've played together, which you think will stick out in his memory, if he's seen you make 2 big bluffs on him, well, he's going to view you as far more bluffy than you actually are, for example. And then all of this should culminate in how you're going to exploit them. So everything in your read about a weak player should culminate, well, any player actually, not just a weak player, we just happen to be talking about weak players, but you should know how you're going to try and exploit a player. So let's say, the last example I gave is of somebody being thinking that you're very bluffy. Well, you can value bet them thinner. You can value bet them with a greater range of hands. You may even experiment with making your value bets a little bit bigger because they're going to cool you down that much more. But you want to have that next step. So many people make observations about players, but then don't go to the next step of answering, how you're going to exploit them. This is a war for people's chips, and unless you're actually going to have a plan and follow it through, all of your information is meaningless. So just to put it into a bit of context, I'm going to give you some sample notes on the player. So I just literally went into one of the poker accounts I had and copied and pasted this. It's not selected to be a particularly amazing set of notes. It's just to give you a little idea. This is from a weak player. So I've written that he limps small pairs and connectors. So that means he limps, well, obviously small pairs, but connectors is, I just use that for things like 5, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8. If I meant bigger cards, I'd put Broadway cards, so I mean small connecting cards. I've put that he 3-bets queen, queen plus only. So that means queens, kings, and aces only. So this is someone you want to play poker with, right? Thinks that I never have it is a great note to have, something like that, where you know his view of you. So I'm more aggressive than this player, and maybe he's caught me bluffing or seen me bluffing or not, whatever. It's caused me to write this note, which means that I'm going to value bet him more. Here's a specific tendency of his: donk bet on the river versus lead equals nuts. So by that I mean, if somebody's betting the continuation bet on the flop and the turn, and he's just calling along, so he doesn't have the lead, and then he makes a bet on the river or a shove on the river, that means that he's got a big hand. That's how he plays his big hands typically. So the flush card comes on the river, he makes a lead bet into me, I can safely fold. I know that he's not bluffing me there. Here's a note for me: attack small bets post flop. So that just means when he makes small bets or lead small bets, I can raise him pretty much with impunity. And if I have this note on a player, I would even kind of do it twice, maybe even that, looking at my card. So if he small bets the flop and I raise and he calls and then he small bets the turn, I might do it again until I have a reason not to. Because what this means is I've seen him make small bets with bad hands, either because he's not bad hands, I mean kind of hands which he's not sure whether they're ahead or not, kind of weak hands, I guess. And I know that he'll fold them. So I've got that note. And then the game plan, obviously, is VB him to death, which is value bet him to death, which is the subject of this module. And I've put overbet question mark, which means that I haven't tried overbetting the pot against him yet, but I'm going to. So question marks in my notes mean either that there's something more I want to know about him or that there's something I haven't tried against him yet. So that's just an example of a more detailed profile. I would encourage you to get even more detailed than this, even with sample hands and stuff like that. You just can't have too much information against players that you're going to play over and over again. Now, I appreciate this is harder if you're multi-tabling to do, or if you're playing, Zoom poker or something that's really quick. All I would say is do it as much as you can. Anything to get an edge, and please develop that game plan against weaker players. Okay, time for you to put this into practice a little bit. So steps to owning weak players. I've got 2 exercises for you on this module, which looked at making it your mission to beat weak players, and then how to find and profile them. And the first exercise is a mindset exercise. So you're going to do this for as long as you like, but let's say at least 3 sessions. So for at least these 3 sessions, for every bad beat you suffer, okay, every bad beat you suffer, you must find a hand where you could have made more chips from a weak player. And I promise you, you will not have a problem doing this. And this is 2 things, really. For one, it will sort out your head with regards to being unlucky against bad players, and just communicate to your brain that there are lots of opportunities out there to make back the chips that they will win from getting lucky against you. And the second thing is it will just open your eyes to the scope of the opportunity. If you're constantly asking yourself, why do these players always get lucky against me, then you're constantly going to be frustrated, because that's what you're focusing on. Instead, you should focus on, where can I make more money from these players? So that's what the exercise is designed to get you to do. So do that for at least 3 sessions, more if you're finding it helpful. The second exercise relates to note-taking and profiling weak players. So find 2 weaker players at every table you play, which you should be able to do. Unless you've got a massive, ridiculous fish at your table spewing thousands, you're going to want at least 2 weaker players at every table you play. So concentrate on finding them, and ask yourself the question, which you should be asking of everyone you play against, by the way: what are his weaknesses, and how will I make chips from them? So how will I make chips from those weaknesses, if you want to write it out longhand. So try and answer those questions for 2 weaker players at every table you play. Again, do this for at least 3 sessions. If necessary, cut down the number of players tables that you play in order to give this a bit more focus until it becomes second nature. And go on from that to make a detailed profile, as I showed you, of each one, with a game plan for beating them and exploiting them. For extra credit, and I know you want extra credit, and there will be a test at the end of this, and the winner will get a weekend in Ibiza. They won't get a weekend in Ibiza, please don't write in. But you will get kudos for sure. And if you tell me on the coaching call, I will give you a big up. But for extra credit, do your hand reviews, which hopefully you're doing anyway, but do several of them on these weaker players and add to your profiles. So when you do your hand reviews, or when you think about hands you've played after or before a session, or before the next session, don't just do that in isolation. Actually go back and make different notes on the players that you're looking to target. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So, you'll get your reads during a game, but everything can be quite frenetic when you're playing. So you want to go back and look at what happened and add extra notes where applicable to develop your profile. Okay, so do those 2 exercises, make them your focus. This is the first step, first couple of steps, in fact, in really increasing the amount of money we're going to make from bad players. It's going to make a big, big jump in your results. So please do the exercises. I know that there's more potential, however well you're doing this right now, and I know it's going to really make a big difference to your game. Now, in the next module, we're going to look at isolating weak players and value betting them, the next two steps of the system, actually putting into practice the information we're getting on these weak players and really increasing the amount of chips we win in a really easy, effortless way. It's going to be a lot of fun. Good luck with these exercises, and I'll see you in Module 2.